Imagine this: a gang of bikers standing right outside your door. The engines roar, your neighbors hide in fear, but you stay calm. That was the night Clara Johnson, a 60-year-old woman, faced what everyone else feared, and instead of being afraid, she welcomed them with calm eyes because she recognized the man she had once saved and knew there was no danger at all. Sometimes the people we judge too quickly are the ones who return with gratitude. So tell me, how would you feel if it were your door they knocked on? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and wherever you are, may your day be filled with kindness and light. It was late evening in the small mountain town where the streets usually fell silent long before midnight. A cold rain had swept in from the Rockies, pounding the asphalt with relentless force, turning every streetlight halo into a blur of watery streaks. The rain washed the town in shadows, and the night felt heavier than most, like an omen waiting just beyond the edge of sight. Clara Johnson, 60 years old, carried herself with the kind of dignity that only years of perseverance could shape. She was a black woman with deep brown skin, short tight curls glistening with raindrops, and a lined but kind face that revealed decades of hard work and quiet endurance. She wore a plain gray coat buttoned tightly at the chest, a faded scarf wrapped twice around her neck, and sensible shoes that squelched against the rain-soaked pavement as she made her way home from her part-time evening shift at the local diner. Though modest in every way, Clara had a presence that spoke of resilience, the kind of quiet strength people noticed even when she said nothing. The street was nearly deserted, most windows shuttered against the storm, when a sudden metallic screech pierced the night. Tires skidded, followed by the sickening crunch of metal meeting asphalt. Clara froze, her heart pounding. Not far ahead, a motorcycle had toppled across the slick road. For a fleeting second, she considered walking away, convincing herself it was none of her business. Yet her conscience would not allow her to ignore the accident. Against the thunder and the hiss of rain, she moved closer, each step heavy with dread. On the ground lay a young man, no older than 25, sprawled beside the twisted frame of a black Harley. His pale face was streaked with rain and grime, his dark hair plastered against his forehead. A leather jacket clung to his body, its sleeves marked with patches that every local recognized. Colors of a biker gang feared by many. His jeans were ripped at the knees, his boots scuffed and soaked, and one arm bent at an unnatural angle. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Beside him whimpered a Labrador retriever, golden-coated but now caked with mud and streaks of blood, its front paw twisted, its soft brown eyes clouded with pain and confusion. The sight of the dog cut through Clara's fear. She crouched instinctively, whispering softly as the animal flinched. "Easy now, baby. I won't hurt you." The Labrador's tail tapped weakly against the ground, as if responding to the warmth in her voice. Clara's hands trembled, not from the rain or cold, but from the weight of the choice before her. The gang patches on the jacket told one story. The helpless faces before her told another. Across the street, two neighbors huddled under an umbrella, shaking their heads. "That's gang trouble," one muttered, voice raised above the storm. "Best leave them be." Another passerby quickened his pace, pulling his companion along. "She's crazy if she touches him. Nothing but trouble comes from that crowd." Their voices carried like daggers through the night, but Clara blocked them out. Compassion was louder than fear. She could not abandon them. Her phone felt slick in her hand as she called emergency services. Her voice was calm, steady, as she gave the location and described both the injured rider and the wounded dog. When she hung up, she slipped off her coat despite the downpour and gently draped it over the young man's chest, shielding him from the cold. The Labrador whimpered and pressed closer to its unconscious master. Clara stroked its head, whispering again, "Hold on, both of you. Help is coming." The storm roared as though to challenge her, thunder echoing like drums of warning. Yet from a window nearby, another pair of eyes watched. Alex Carter, 13 years old, with tousled brown hair and the restlessness of youth, pressed his forehead against the glass of his small apartment. His pajamas hung loose on his frame, his hands gripping the curtain tightly. He had seen Mrs. Johnson many times, always kind, always gentle, offering cookies when his mother worked late. But tonight she seemed different. Tonight she bent over a biker everyone else would fear, and Alex could not make sense of it. Questions tumbled through his mind. Why would she help him? Didn't she see the jacket, the colors, the danger they implied? Wasn't she afraid of what might follow? he whispered to himself, almost as though accusing her. Why would she risk it? He's dangerous. Yet as he stared, something shifted within him. Confusion tangled with awe, fear mixed with reluctant admiration. The wail of an ambulance soon cut through the storm. Red and blue lights strobed against the wet pavement as paramedics hurried to the scene. They lifted the young man onto a stretcher, their hands quick and practiced, then gently wrapped the Labrador's injured leg and secured the animal for transport. Clara stood drenched, her scarf heavy with water, but relief softened her face. She caught the medic's eye and asked quietly, "They'll be all right?" The medic nodded, promising they would do everything possible. When the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, Clara remained alone in the rain. Whispers of disapproval still drifted from nearby doorways, but she paid them no mind. She had done what she knew was right. Her shoes splashed through puddles as she turned toward home, her figure fading into the storm. From his window above, Alex still watched, his wide eyes following her retreat. The night had carved itself into his memory, the first time he saw that courage and kindness could defy fear. In the quiet after the storm's crescendo, a fragile thread of connection had been woven between a woman whose life had been defined by silent resilience, a wounded stranger and his loyal dog, and a young boy beginning to question the lessons of fear the world had taught him. The night closed with a soaked coat left behind in a hospital room and the echo of sirens fading into the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving the streets of the small town washed clean, but echoing with whispers of the night before. Puddles reflected a pale winter sun, and though the sky had cleared, the air still carried the weight of rumor heavier than the rain ever had. By morning, what had happened on that rain-soaked street, the woman who had knelt beside a biker and his wounded Labrador, the ambulance lights cutting through the storm, was on every tongue, carried from porches to barber shops, from grocery aisles to church pews. The story spread not with admiration, but with suspicion, twisting as it traveled, until the woman who had saved a life was painted in shades of danger. At the diner where Clara often worked her evening shifts, two men in flannel jackets sipped coffee at the counter, their voices pitched just loud enough to be heard. "Did you hear about Johnson?" one asked, stirring sugar with exaggerated slowness. "Tangled up with gang trash last night. Imagine that." His companion smirked. 60 years old and still doesn't know better. Folks like her bring trouble to the neighborhood. They chuckled, their laughter thin and sharp, bouncing off the chrome and tile. Clara, standing by the coffee pot, heard every word but did not flinch. She refilled their cups with steady hands, offering the same quiet service she always did, her only response a soft nod and a polite smile. On Main Street, an older woman tugged her granddaughter's hand and whispered, "Stay away from her, honey. She doesn't know who she's mixing with." Across town, a clerk at the hardware store shook his head when her name was mentioned, muttering, "Once you open your door to that kind, you never know what follows." Even Father Bennett, the gray-haired priest who usually defended her, hesitated when asked. "Clara means well," he said gently, "but she may have invited more than she realized." With every whisper, Clara's world grew a little colder, though she kept her posture straight, her voice calm, and her steps measured. At home, her small kitchen felt quieter than usual. The radio hummed in the corner, but even the music could not drown the echo of town gossip. Clara prepared a simple meal, vegetable soup and bread, her hands moving out of habit more than hunger. She paused by the window, looking at the street where passers-by cast sidelong glances at her porch. She told herself she had done the right thing. "A life is a life," she whispered under her breath, "and a creature in pain deserves mercy." Yet even as she repeated the words, doubt flickered inside her like a candle struggling in the wind. What if the town was right? What if by saving that young man she had invited trouble onto her doorstep? The thought weighed on her chest, and though her face remained serene, her heart carried unease. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Middle School, Alex Carter heard the same story retold in tones of scorn. In the cafeteria, 3 boys crowded around a table, their voices eager and mocking. "My dad says she's got biker friends now," one sneered. "Bet she's hiding them in her basement." Another laughed, tossing a grape across the table. "She's crazy. Why would she save someone like that? Everyone knows those guys are killers." The third, a heavier boy with freckles, leaned in with relish. She's probably part of them now. Imagine old Mrs. Johnson riding a Harley." Their laughter rang out, cruel and careless. Alex sat at the edge of the table, his tray untouched. His cheeks burned as he listened, but he didn't know what to say. He wanted to defend Clara, the woman who had watched him when his mom worked late, who slipped him cookies wrapped in napkins, who always greeted him with kindness. But the weight of his peers' laughter pressed him down, silencing his protest. He kept his head low, fiddling with the crust of his sandwich, and felt a sharp twist of shame. Not for Clara, but for himself. That evening, unable to shake the sting of their words, Alex walked slowly home, kicking at the loose stones along the road. He saw Clara sitting on her porch, a book in her lap, her glasses sliding low on her nose. She looked up as he approached, her smile warm despite the faint shadows beneath her eyes. "How was school, Alex?" she asked, her voice gentle as always. Alex hesitated, then blurted, "They were talking about you. They said you're with them now, that you're not safe." His voice cracked with confusion more than accusation. Clara closed her book and set it aside. She studied his young face, the conflict written plainly across it, and she didn't laugh or dismiss his worry. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and spoke slowly, as though each word were meant to take root. "People will always talk, Alex. Fear makes their voices loud, but it doesn't make them right." She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "A human life, a living creature, is never worthless. When someone is hurt, you help. That's all I did. That's all anyone should do." Alex frowned, his brow furrowing. "But weren't you scared? What if he hurt you? What if they come back?" Clara reached out and touched his shoulder lightly. "Of course I was afraid. Courage doesn't mean you feel no fear. It means you choose kindness anyway. Don't let prejudice blind you, child. Judge a person by the mercy they show, not the jacket they wear." The boy stared at her, the words pressing against his doubts. In his young mind, so many lessons had been framed in absolutes, good and bad, safe and dangerous, us and them. Yet here was Clara, standing in the rain-soaked memory of a night when she had chosen differently, and he could not deny the quiet strength that radiated from her. For the first time, he wondered if the laughter of his classmates and the whispers of adults might not be the whole truth. Later, as twilight settled over the town, Clara stood by her window, watching the street again. Neighbors passed by without waving, some crossing to the opposite sidewalk rather than meet her gaze. She held her chin high, but inside her stomach knotted. She had lived in this community for decades, yet one act of compassion had turned her into an outcast overnight. She sighed, whispering the words again. "A life is a life. A soul is a soul." They gave her strength, even as loneliness wrapped itself around her like the cold evening air. In the quiet of her small house, with only the ticking clock for company, Clara found herself both comforted and burdened by the truth. She had done what she believed was right, yet the cost was isolation, suspicion, and whispers behind closed doors. The town might never see her act as courage, but she could not allow their fear to rewrite her choice. Outside, the last light of day faded into night, leaving Clara with her thoughts and the fragile comfort of knowing that at least one young boy was beginning to understand. Several weeks passed, yet the town's whispers lingered like a fog that refused to lift. Clara Johnson carried on with her quiet routines, shopping at the small grocery store, working her evening shifts at the diner, tending the modest flowers that framed her porch. But the air around her felt different. Neighbors no longer paused for small talk, doors closed just a little faster when she walked by, and every smile she offered seemed to vanish before it was returned. She told herself she was used to solitude, but even her resilience could not completely shield her from the loneliness that followed her like a shadow. Alex, who still visited in the afternoons, had grown more thoughtful since their conversation, though he never stopped watching her with the wide-eyed mixture of admiration and curiosity that only a boy of 13 could carry. It was on a Saturday afternoon, when the sky hung heavy with low gray clouds and the smell of rain lingered in the air, that the peace of their quiet street was shattered. The first sound was faint, a low rumble that might have been mistaken for thunder, but it grew steadily louder until the windows rattled in their frames and the ground itself seemed to hum. Within minutes, more than 20 motorcycles roared into view, their chrome catching the weak light, their exhausts splitting the air with a guttural growl that rolled down the narrow street like a storm-given flesh. The effect was immediate. Curtains snapped shut, blinds clattered into place, and front doors slammed as families scrambled to pull their children indoors. The hum of engines reverberated against the houses, the vibration unsettling dishes on shelves, sending nervous pets darting under furniture. To the people of the town, the scene was nothing short of invasion. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers clenched their jaws, and everywhere there was the sense of a community bracing against something it did not understand but feared deeply. Inside her house, Clara froze as the sound approached. Her heart hammered in her chest, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. She stood near the window, her hands pressed against the sill, watching as the line of motorcycles slowed and then came to a halt just outside her home. Leather jackets marked with bold insignias glistened in the damp air, the riders' helmets reflecting the cloudy sky. They were men of all sizes, broad-shouldered giants with arms tattooed from wrist to collar, lean figures with sharp eyes hardened by years on the road, and younger faces trying to mask their nerves with practiced scowls. Clara's pulse quickened. In her mind, the voices of the town replayed, "Once you open your door to that kind, you never know what follows." The engines died one by one, leaving behind a silence more oppressive than the noise that preceded it. All Clara could hear was the frantic thudding of her own heart. Her first instinct was to lock the door, pull the curtains, and retreat. But another voice within her rose louder, the same voice that had guided her to kneel beside a stranger weeks earlier. She steadied her trembling hands against her apron, drew a breath, and forced her feet to move. With each step toward the door, she fought the urge to turn back, until at last her hand gripped the knob and twisted it open. The scene beyond made her inhale sharply. Standing at the front, his helmet tucked under his arm, was the very young man she had once pulled from the rain. His hair was shorter now, trimmed neatly, his leather jacket still marked with patches but worn with a new sense of pride rather than defeat. His face bore a scar along the temple, fresh but healing, and his eyes, once glazed with pain, now shone clear with vitality. At his side stood a Labrador, golden fur gleaming despite the overcast day, its body filled out again with strength, tail wagging with eager recognition. The dog's eyes locked onto Clara, bright and full of life, as though it remembered the hands that had steadied it through suffering. The young man, perhaps 25 at most, shifted his weight awkwardly, as if uncertain how to bridge the chasm between his world and hers. His name, whispered among the bikers behind him, seemed to be Daniel. His frame was tall but lean, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and though his clothes spoke of rebellion, his expression in that moment was one of humility. Clara felt her shoulders loosen just a fraction, relief flickering through the fear that had held her captive. Behind her lace curtains, Alex pressed himself against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. His heart pounded with the same rhythm as the engines that had shaken the street only moments before. From his vantage point, he could see the crowd of bikers, their posture both intimidating and strangely respectful, and he could see Clara's slender figure framed in the doorway, standing alone against the weight of all those eyes. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to run to her, to shout a warning, to call for help, but his feet refused to move. Instead, he crouched lower, wide-eyed, torn between dread and fascination. For a long moment, time itself seemed to stretch. Clara's lips parted, but no words emerged. The air smelled of oil and damp leather, heavy with tension. Then the Labrador broke the silence, letting out a sharp bark that echoed like a signal. Clara startled, then softened as the dog trotted forward a few steps, its tail wagging furiously. The animal's joy was unmistakable, a living bridge between past pain and present gratitude. The young man stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "Ma'am," he began, his tone carrying both reverence and uncertainty. "I don't know if you remember me." He glanced down at the Labrador, then back at Clara. "But you saved me and him. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for you." His words hung in the air, steady but vulnerable, cutting through the heavy silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. The tension eased, though Clara's heartbeat still raced. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening as they fell upon the Labrador's shining gaze. For weeks she had wondered if kindness would only bring danger to her door. Now, in the presence of the very lives she had preserved, That question began to dissolve. Around them, the crowd of bikers remained still, silent witnesses to the reunion, their rough exteriors concealing stories unspoken. Inside, Alex pressed his hand against the glass, hardly daring to blink. The fear that had gripped him slowly gave way to awe. He had braced for violence, but what unfolded instead was something far stranger to his young mind: gratitude. The boy whispered to himself, almost reverently, "She was right." He remained hidden, though, unable to pull his eyes from the scene, determined not to miss whatever came next. The air outside Clara's modest home was heavy with silence after the engines had died. 20 men stood in formation, leather jackets damp from the lingering mist, boots leaving dark imprints on the wet pavement. The young man she had saved lingered near the front with his golden Labrador, the dog's tail wagging like a metronome of hope, its joyful bark having broken the tension just moments earlier. Clara's hand still rested on the edge of the doorframe, knuckles pale, her heart a storm of fear and relief, battling for dominance. The street, which only minutes before had seemed like a fortress of closed shutters and locked doors, now felt like a stage awaiting its final act. From among the line of riders, a figure emerged. He was taller than most, broad-shouldered, with a frame built from years of physical labor and countless miles on the road. His beard was thick and streaked with gray, his eyes dark but unexpectedly calm, carrying the depth of a man who had seen too much of both violence and loss. His leather jacket bore insignias more elaborate than the rest, the markings of authority. As he approached, his steps were measured, his posture neither threatening nor submissive, but grounded in quiet strength. This was the leader, the one the others instinctively followed. Clara's breath caught when he stopped before her porch. She had expected menace, perhaps demands, perhaps retaliation for stepping into a world that was not hers. But instead he inclined his head, the gesture subtle yet unmistakably respectful. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant, carrying not the roughness of intimidation, but the weight of sincerity. "If it hadn't been for you," he said, pausing to glance back at the young man and the Labrador at his side, "my brother and Buddy would not be standing here today. You saved them both. We owe you a debt." His gaze returned to hers, steady and unwavering. "From this day forward, you have our protection. No harm will come to you, not while we breathe." The words struck Clara with a force more powerful than the roar of their engines. For weeks she had feared this moment, imagined hostile men pounding at her door, envisioned consequences for an act of compassion the town had warned her against. Instead, she found herself staring into the eyes of a man offering not threats but a vow. The tremor that had gripped her chest released all at once, and before she could stop them, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She clutched the edge of her shawl, unable to speak, overcome by the sheer weight of gratitude given in a place where she had braced for fear. The Labrador whined softly and pressed against the young man's leg, its gaze flicking between Clara and the biker leader as though it too understood the significance of the exchange. The young man laid a hand on its head, his lips pressed tight in emotion he struggled to contain. His scar caught the light as he tilted his face toward Clara, eyes bright with something far softer than she had expected from a world branded with violence. Behind the leader, the other bikers remained silent, but their presence carried no hostility. Some bowed their heads slightly, others crossed their arms but with expressions that softened at the corners. The roughness of their tattoos, the scowls carved by years on the road, seemed to fade in the glow of the moment. For them, this was no confrontation. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. Inside the nearby apartment, Alex pressed his palms hard against the glass of his window. His mouth hung open as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. These were the men his classmates had mocked and feared, the men the town spoke of in hushed tones as monsters who lurked on the edge of the law. Yet here they were, standing in reverent silence while their leader offered a pledge of gratitude to Clara Johnson, the woman who had once been laughed at for her kindness. Alex felt a shiver run through him, not of fear, but of realization. Everything he thought he knew about them cracked apart in that instant. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, his breath fogging the glass, and for the first time in his young life, he saw that people could not be defined so easily. Clara, the woman others scorned, was being honored by the very people they despised. His heart raced not with dread, but with admiration so strong it startled him. He whispered under his breath, as though confessing to the night itself, "She was right all along." The words trembled, but they were filled with conviction. Back at the doorway, Clara wiped at her tears with trembling fingers, her voice finally returning in a whisper so soft it was nearly stolen by the breeze. "I only did what anyone should have done," she said. "I couldn't just leave them there." The leader gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting beneath the steel of his beard. "Most people would have, but you didn't. That makes all the difference." His hand twitched at his side as though he wanted to offer it in a handshake but restrained himself, perhaps wary of overwhelming her further. The moment held, suspended in the hushed air of the street, until the leader took a slow step back, giving Clara the space to breathe. She nodded once more, gratitude mirrored in her eyes, and the Labrador barked again, this time full of unrestrained joy, as though sealing the promise that had been spoken. Neighbors, still hidden behind blinds and curtains, caught glimpses of the scene and blinked in disbelief. The woman they had dismissed as reckless was now the recipient of loyalty and protection from the very men they feared most. In the stillness that followed, Clara stood in her doorway, her shoulders no longer burdened by fear, but lifted by an unexpected assurance. For weeks she had lived under the cloud of gossip, doubting herself, wondering if her kindness had been a mistake. Tonight that doubt melted away, replaced by something deeper than vindication, the knowledge that compassion had not only saved lives, but had also transformed them. And in the window above, Alex leaned his forehead against the glass, his young mind forever marked by the vision of outlaws bowing their heads to kindness. The fear he once carried dissolved, leaving only awe, and in his heart grew a respect for Clara so profound that he knew it would guide him for years to come. The vow of protection spoken that night had already been more than Clara could ever have imagined, yet the weeks that followed revealed an even deeper meaning to the words. The bikers did not simply disappear into the horizon, leaving her with promises. Instead, they returned with purpose, their engines rumbling not in menace, but in solidarity, bringing with them tools, supplies, and a determination that startled the quiet neighborhood into restless curiosity. Where gossip had once filled the air, now the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter began to replace it. The dilapidated wood of Clara's old home, sagging from years of neglect and patched together with her modest savings, soon echoed with new life. Each morning the riders arrived, their leather jackets traded for worn work shirts, their gloved hands carrying lumber and paint instead of chains and bottles. Some were burly men with tattoos snaking across their arms, others younger and still proving themselves, but all worked with a unity that belied their fearsome reputations. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering in disbelief as outlaws laid shingles, repaired plumbing, and replaced windows that had rattled in every storm. To them it was impossible to reconcile the image of men once feared with the sight of those same men steadying ladders and laughing over crooked nails. Yet day by day, the transformation of Clara's home became undeniable. Clara herself could hardly believe what unfolded before her eyes. She had grown used to silence and isolation, yet now her yard buzzed with energy, her porch filled with muddy boots and the smell of sawdust. She brewed coffee for them each morning, her hands busy pouring steaming mugs, while they greeted her with nods and smiles that seemed out of place on such weathered faces. The Labrador buddy bounded around the yard, no longer limping, carrying scraps of wood in his mouth as though he were part of the crew. Clara would stroke his head fondly and marvel at how his presence lifted her spirit. Still, the town struggled with its prejudice. At the market, Clara overheard murmurs. "What are they doing here every day? It can't be good. She's letting them take over her house." But the evidence was undeniable. The peeling paint and crumbling porch were gone, replaced with fresh beams and clean siding. Where her roof had sagged, now sturdy shingles gleamed. Where her windows had been drafty, now glass panes shone clear. Suspicion slowly gave way to curiosity, and curiosity bent toward awe. When the last nail was driven and the final wall painted, the bikers stood back to admire the home that had risen from their labor. No longer the weary shack of an aging widow, Clara's house stood tall and dignified, its frame strong, its windows polished, its porch broad enough to welcome anyone who came. The day of its unveiling was chosen carefully, and word spread quickly through the town. Though many had doubted, nearly everyone came. Some dressed in Sunday best, others in work clothes, but all arrived with hearts stirred by something they could not yet admit. On the morning of the gathering, the street filled with people. Families lined the sidewalks, children tugged at their parents' hands, and whispers turned to silence as the bikers rolled in. More than 20 engines thundered once more, but this time no one hid behind curtains. Instead, they watched as the riders dismounted, their jackets bearing patches that once symbolized fear, now standing for gratitude. At the center of it all was Clara, dressed in a simple blue dress with her gray scarf draped over her shoulders, her eyes shining with tears she could not hold back. Buddy trotted at her side, his golden coat gleaming, his tail sweeping happily against her leg. The leader, the same man who had spoken on her porch, stood before the crowd. He raised his voice not in defiance but in reverence. "This woman saved my brother's life. She saved his dog's life. And because of her, we stand here today. We could not repay such a debt with words alone, so we gave what we had, our hands, our time, our strength. This house is our gift, a small piece of what she gave us." His voice carried down the street, sinking into the hearts of neighbors who had once judged too quickly. Clara pressed her hand against her lips, overwhelmed, and the tears flowed freely now. She bent to hug Buddy tightly, her shoulders shaking with the weight of gratitude. The dog licked her face, tail wagging with pure devotion, and the crowd that once whispered now stood silent in awe. Slowly, clapping began, hesitant at first, then swelling into a chorus of applause that rolled down the street like thunder, not of fear but of admiration. Faces once clouded with suspicion now shone with respect. From the side of the street, Alex broke free from the group of children and ran straight to Clara. His small arms wrapped tightly around her waist, his face pressed against her coat as he cried out with a voice clear and strong, "You're a silent hero." The words rang out with the sincerity of youth, carrying further than he knew. The applause grew louder, filling the air with warmth that washed away the last traces of doubt. Clara looked down at him, her heart swelling with a love beyond words. She rested a hand on his shoulder and smiled through her tears. In that instant, she understood something profound. Kindness did not end with her act, nor with the biker's gratitude. It had planted a seed in the heart of a child, one who would carry it forward, one who would remember that the strength to do what is right lies not in fear, but in compassion. The circle of her choice had widened, and in Alex she saw the future of that choice living on. The sun broke through the clouds at last, casting golden light over the rebuilt home and the faces gathered before it. Laughter rose, mingling with the sound of children playing, the rumble of bikes at rest, and the steady bark of Buddy chasing after a stick. For the first time in many years, Clara felt not the weight of solitude but the embrace of community, and she knew that the act of mercy she once doubted had become the cornerstone of something greater. In the end, this story is not only about Clara, a woman who chose kindness over fear. It is about every person who finds the strength to act with compassion even when no one is watching, who lends a hand without asking for reward, and who dares to see the world not through prejudice, but through humanity. These are the silent heroes among us, the ones who remind us that true courage is found in mercy and that dignity is born from love. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what you are thinking, because your voice matters here. And if you want more stories of resilience and compassion, remember to subscribe to our channel. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may your days be filled with kindness and light.